Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Good, Bad, and Ugly of Business. I'm your host, Katherine Becker, and on this podcast, we love to interview all sorts of interesting people because we want to learn what they've learned. Because while a smart person learns from their mistakes, a genius learns from the mistakes of others. And we want to learn what these people have learned so that we can either avoid the mistakes completely or fail faster. My guest today has really such an interesting and innovative mind, and it's such a great moment to look at what you have in your life and your business and say, where are the innovations there that you can make? Even if it's not your background, you might still be able to surprise yourself. So I have Jim Metropoulos, who is the CEO and founder of Blue Box and Kyvos, and he is changing and innovating the way that we interact with our HVAC systems, the place that we spend 90% of our life in climate-controlled settings. So Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Colin.
I think it's fascinating what you have done with Blue Box because it's a problem that most people probably didn't even realize is an issue. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what Blue Box is and the problem that it solves.
Yeah, absolutely. And you couldn't be more accurate in that. Even people who are in the industry and deal with these systems on a day in, day out basis, it's almost like a blind spot, in this space. And so what Blue Box, Blue Box is an innovation that I had accidentally developed a few years ago that solves a fundamental problem in HVAC, which is how to penetrate and clean the heat transfer coils in the HVAC system. And what the coils are, this is, HVAC system is, all the air in a building must pass through your HVAC system. What they do is pass through these coils, and warm air, it goes through cold coils. There's a refrigerant that flows through, and warm air goes in and cold air comes out. It's the HVAC system is in essence a heat absorption machine, right? And during normal operation, what happens is these systems, they form dirt, grime, biology likes to grow deep within the coils. And what is interesting is that since the invention of the HVAC system, over 100 years ago, it was developed in the 1920s, the industry never solved how to penetrate the coils. So what I solved is how to penetrate the coils and how to clean them. And what we do is inject a odorless, chemical-free enzyme into the coils, and we inject it as a thick foam. And how we penetrate the coil, and this is what I patented, is you keep the system on while you inject it as a foam, and the airflow draws the foam through the coils. Now, coils, to give you your audience an idea what because you can have coils in your home which are not that thick, they're only a couple inches deep, but in big commercial systems they could be 12 inches deep, right? So they're very densely packed. The coils are designed so only airflow can move, air molecules can move through the coils and nothing else, right? So when they would foul, if you try to clean them, which was typically using pressure washers, you'd only get the outside, like say 2 inches on one side, 2 inches on the other side, but everything in the middle was always untouched and untouchable, right? And what it does, what this problem does, it inhibits airflow and it inhibits heat transfer. So if air cannot move through the system and if the coils are covered with junk and it can't, transfer its heat, then you don't have air conditioning, right? Or
Yeah, it'd probably be pretty ineffective, right?
Yeah. So this problem, believe it or not, so whether it's your house or a high-rise building, the HVAC system can consume up to 70% of all the energy in that building, depending on house time. It would be sometimes 50 to 70%, but around in that range. Believe it or not, 30 to 50% of all that energy is wasted just because there's never been a way to clean coils.
Wow.
Now,
without totally replacing them, which is probably expensive.
So to replace, just a one coil, like in these large, like in a large commercial system, I mean, that's $100,000 to $500,000 check. right?
Geez, and you probably have to shut everything down
You
and
got to
take
shut it
time.
down. You got to blow out walls. You got to bring in helicopters sometimes. You got, you know, like it
Oh my
is
gosh.
like for big buildings, right? It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
even on small
Because they're
systems.
always on the roof, typically.
They could be in the roof, like it depends on the type of facility and type of system, but they could be in the roof. They could be in, they're built into the infrastructure of buildings. So like, it's easy to put them in when you're building it, but it's impossible to almost pull them out. And so it's a nonstop problem. And, the way to think about this is last year, the world spent $135 billion on new HVAC systems. The vast majority of that spend was to replace systems because their coils are plugged up.
Wow. Just from
Think of
being
that, right? That's a
just
crazy
general
number.
use. Nothing
Yeah,
wrong with them.
yeah. So so this is what Blue Box solves. It solves this core fundamental problem in the HVAC system, and by solving this problem, it transforms it basically restores everything to brand new, and it makes it easy to restore your building, your HVAC system to new, and to keep it running like new. And that's our objective is how to take a building, any kind of facility, and how to restore that building to its design peak thermal efficiency.
Mhm.
And this, obviously reduces energy consumption, reduces carbon emissions, but it also, the impact this has on human health is really profound, because what by restoring the airflow in the coils, you can now move air through a building um, uh, much greater at a greater volume.
Sure.
And the way to think about this is, so most commercial buildings are designed by code. You circulate 90% of the air, and then you bring in 10% of the air as fresh air.
Mhm.
No building on this planet, unless it's brand new, just built, gets 10% outside air. And the reason for it is because the coils are plugged, especially the outside air units. They're exposed to the outside environment, right? So
Right.
they plug up the quickest in the center. So what happens is these buildings will have maybe 5% outside air, 2%, right? And and what that does to indoor air quality is very profound, because it's almost like, imagine you have a pond and you have a stream that feeds into that pond. That pond is nice and healthy and clean, and you know and fresh, right? But if you block off that stream, that pond then becomes
Gonna stagnate.
it becomes nasty, and it's there. The same thing happens in big buildings, right?
Well,
And
what's really coming to mind for me is, and I think that COVID really brought this to bear for a lot of people, is being in a plane. People are like, oh, you have to still wear a mask. There's people that still wear a mask in a plane just because they're
yeah,
like, oh, we're breathing all this air.
all that air is recirculated,
But they're
and
not thinking that when they're in their office building, it's
yeah,
kind of the same such situation, just on
it
such a
is.
larger scale.
It's not exactly the same, but it is dead close. And what happens in big buildings, you have a big building with a lot of people, and what happens is, because that air is recirculated, right? And because you're not getting fresh outside air molecules into the building, it starts to load up with CO2, because
Mm,
everybody's exhaling CO2.
right.
So if you're in your office and you're starting to you find yourself getting sleepy and tired, etc., it's because there's probably a lot of people in there, and the buildup of CO2 is. And Harvard actually did a series of studies on this, that I believe, don't quote me on this one, but I think it was something like workplace productivity suffers by up to 30% because of elevated levels of CO2 in a building. And
That
this
makes sense.
it does, and it's I mean, you can, there's now a big movement now to put like CO2 monitors in buildings to see where that number's at. But you can measure the problem, but no one's been able to solve it, because without solving the coils. And this is what we're now doing is, guys, we can now restore these coils. So you're now moving all this volume of air, fresh air. So you're getting your 10%, and then also with all the other coils in the building, you're moving that air faster, because if all the other coils are still plugged up, everything slows down, right? Everything just becomes kind of rancid. So now everything becomes very healthy. And so obviously you have the big energy efficiency gain, you have the effect on carbon emissions, but it's the human health component that is, I don't know, I find it personally truly exciting, right?
Yeah.
Is it has this big impact. And it's kind of interesting because, the worst coils in the world, hands down, that we've seen are hospitals.
That's kind of where you
And
want the best quality air, right?
well, you would think, and it's not, is to no fault of hospitals. It's just hospitals are where all the sick people are at, right?
Mhm.
And it's a lot of people in a tightly, in a tight space, and all that air is recirculated, and you're not getting fresh outside air, right? And it's this, and it comes down. And so what happens? The coils are very quick to refoul, or to become very fouled, biologically fouled, and then it becomes a disaster. So we work now, like Blue Box is getting pulled into um a lot of hospitals, like for example, Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, New York City, is one of the top cancer facilities, I think, in the world. You're down in Houston, MD Anderson is another cancer center that we've been working closely with. I'm in Dallas, like the Baylor White Hospitals here,
Mhm.
servicing HCA, which is the largest hospital group in the United States. They're now starting to implement Blue Box throughout, their facilities. Kaiser
That's wonderful.
So it's exciting to see that, starts getting implemented on that. And so, yeah,
But this isn't your background, if I understand correctly, right? So, like, how did you even A, know this was a problem, and then B, come up with a solution to solve it that people in the industry didn't
yeah.
come up
So I had no idea about the problem.
with?
B, this was an accidental innovation. So, it's funny. I always joke with everybody. I'm like, I didn't set out upon the world to solve the great coil problem no one knows about, he said in the beginning. I mean, it's true. I originally designed Blue Box, and a little background. I mean, I'm UCLA political science, right? Like, I'm not an engineer. I'm all self-taught in this. And I had originally designed Blue Box as, and even how I got into that was kind of crazy, but like, we'll keep the focus here a little bit. I designed Blue Box originally to do chemical cleaning in refineries and power plants. And the system back then, I was kind of going after the same objective, which was how to improve heat transfer in big systems as a new model for reducing energy consumption and carbon emissions, right? Because it's big industrial equipment that actually consumes the energy of the world. It's not, people don't consume hydrocarbons. They operate equipment that consumes the hydrocarbons
Right.
that faces the modern world, right? So Blue Ox was originally a system to do chemical cleaning, but what I designed the system was, the earlier system was like size of a suitcase. And with that suitcase, I could fill a 3-story house with foam, and I'd mix in hydrochloric acid, sodium hydroxide, different chemistries. And it was a way to how to do large scale chemical cleaning in facilities, but you minimize the use of chemicals, use of water, and it would deliver a better clean, right? And this would then, optimize a oil refinery and a power plant. And this is what I was originally going after. Now, the big problem in industrial facilities is biofouling, which biofouling is when bacteria grows or fungus grows on, which they have a tendency to grow in equipment. They form what are called biofilms. And the way to think about biofilm is, if you ever see a snail and that trail
Mm,
that leaves behind, that's a biofilm. Now, what's interesting about biofilms is that you can um, you could throw hydrochloric acid on biofilm and it'll bounce right off. It could care less.
really?
And this was a big problem when you're doing chemical cleaning, because I'm trying to remove calcium buildups or iron oxides. and I had biofilm there, and it's like a protective shield. And so I started pioneering how to use enzymes to remove the biofilm. And how it came about it was I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, biofilms, it's a biological, something like this, it's got to be somebody's food source, right? Like, or it's got to
Right.
be in nature to break it down, right? And that's when I discovered enzymes, and I started pioneering how to use enzymes to pre-treat systems to remove the biofilm. Here's the thing about biofilm. Biofilm inhibits heat transfer 5 times greater than, say, calcium, right?
Oh,
Calcium,
wow. And
sure.
the calcium is something you see more, so it seems like it would
Yeah,
be worse
yeah. Where
because it's
where
visible.
biofilm could be on a piece of metal, and you couldn't even see it. It's like microscopic,
Yeah.
but it's like a thermal blanket, right? So it's kind of one of these things where it's like out of sight, out of mind. People don't really understand biofilm and its issue with heat transfer and all this stuff. So when I started treating these systems with enzymes, what I found, or pre-treating these systems, I was able to restore the heat transfer of these big equipment just by removing the biofilm.
Mm.
And to me, that was a big moment, because while I was minimizing the use of, say, hydrochloric acid by 95%, I'm still slinging hydrochloric acid, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
it's still a dangerous process. And it was limited in applications and scale, and like all these issues. So I pivoted the business to eliminate chemicals 100% and just focus on enzymes. And so I had then started going after these systems called like cooling towers, which are part of the HVAC system. The cooling towers are what are outside, they reject heat, and they have water in them, and they are nasty. So cooling towers, like, this is where you'll find Legionella, right? Is
Mhm.
forming in, it sort of is in the cooling towers, and they just load up with all kinds of nasty microbes, and get all gummed up and stuff. So I started treating those systems with the enzymes, and then and it was interesting. I was actually at a auto plant in Detroit, and I was looking at their cooling towers and things called scrubbers and other industrial equipment. And this engineer well, I'm walking through the plant with this plant engineer, and we walked past this giant air handler. And in HVAC, commercial HVAC systems, you call the big systems air handlers. And this thing was a monster. It's like 20 feet high, 30 feet across, 12 inches deep, as big as a house, right? And this one plant had 200 of these systems throughout the plant.
Oh my gosh.
To give you a sense, right? Like, you're moving massive amount. And so he stops me in front of this massive piece of equipment, and he goes, "Hey, do you think you can adapt your process to clean the coils in my air handler?" And I knew nothing about coils, nothing about air handlers. And I'm like, "Sure." How hard could that be? The
Famous last words, right?
classic entrepreneur's response to anything is like,
Yeah, I'll
"Hey,
figure it
don't
out.
worry, Tony, don't worry, I got to figure it out." And um, and it was interesting because it was I didn't know the problem. I didn't know, I didn't understand the problem. Um, but as soon as I saw the system, I knew exactly how I was going to treat it, because the coils are made out of soft metal, aluminum and copper. So I go, can't use chemicals.
Mhm.
I saw that there was moisture in the coils. So I knew there was going to be biology in there. And I'm like, perfect for enzymes, right? And I just couldn't figure out how to penetrate that coil. So at first, what I did was, when you work on industrial equipment, you do a thing called lockout tagout. And you shut off the equipment. You don't work on big industrial equipment when it's live. That's considered bad.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I did lockout tagout, and I couldn't get through. I'm trying to inject enzymes, into the coils, and I couldn't get through. And I'm like, son of a gun, how do you get through this coil? And I didn't know the answer was you don't. No one does, right? But then I just came up with the idea. I'm like, well, lockout tagout is a safety protocol that, so to protect you, because you don't want to be near live equipment when it's running, right? but the way air handler is designed, I'm on the air uptake side, right? The air intake side where it's a wall of coil. There's no
There's no
mechanical.
entry.
Yeah, there's no mechanical equipment near me. It's all on the
Yeah.
other side of the coil. I'm protected. I can't get sucked through the coil. And you got, 75,000 cubic feet per minute of air moving through, and it's all fresh air. It's like, you're fine. So I go to
Did
the
you
engineer.
have to like go to OSHA to get like special permission or anything to do this, or?
So I technically probably should have, but um,
We can
but
cut this part out if you want.
yeah. So, well, it turns out we've dealt with, this issue now. Like, I mean, it's considered, it's safe, right?
Yeah, yeah. You've been able to prove that it's safe.
But like when I first proposed this, I went to the engineers at the auto plant, and it was hilarious because I go, "Hey guys, do you mind if I keep the systems on while I inject enzymes into the coils?" Right? And these guys, these are big auto plant, engineers, and you know, not the friendliest of guys you probably encounter, and they're looking at me.
I know the type.
Yeah. And they're nodding, they're looking at me as I'm talking, they're nodding their head, and they're like, not a chance in hell, right? And I just go, all right, listen, I get this goes against lockout tagout, I get the safety thing, but that motor is 20 feet away on the other side of the coils. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna be on the upside, and I already knew how the process was going to work, right? The foam's not going to go flying all over the place. It's going to, you control the process by how you inject the foam in. You make it nice and thick, and it comes down, it oozes, and it stays right on the coil. Then it goes into the drain and stuff. So after about an hour of arguing with these guys, right? And I just would not let it drop. I'm like, this is the way to do it. And so I finally go, let me do a small little section. Let me show you what I'm talking about. And then finally they relented. They're like, all right, go ahead and do it. Just, don't tell anybody, like just do it on the down low. And so I did it. And I improved the efficiency of that system by 40%.
In just a test area.
Just, I did the entire.
Oh, when you did the whole thing. Gotcha.
And I reduced the pressure. It's called the pressure drop by 40%. And reducing the pressure in the system means that the rough rule of thumb is a 1% reduction in pressure equals a 1% reduction in the brake horsepower on that motor to move the air through the system, right?
Okay.
So a 40% reduction, and these are massive motors. Put it this way, I probably saved them just in that one unit anywhere from 10 to 15,000, maybe $20,000 on reduced energy consumption just by cleaning that coil.
And they had 200 of them?
They have 200 of them.
Wow.
And this is just on the fan power of that system. Not talking about the improvement of heat transfer, and then you get into things called chilled water improvements, and all these other things. And so when I first did it, these guys looked at this and were like, whoa, what did you do? And I'm like, whoa, what did like I knew a 40%, I didn't understand the full dynamics of the system, but I understood a 40% drop is going to equate to is a big deal, right? So that was the beginning of Blue Box in its modern state, right? It was interesting because I did another system, it was a 50% drop. Then I did another system with 65% drop. And all of a sudden, then I talked to some, HVAC engineers, and this one old timer, he told me, he goes, listen, you just solved the most fundamental problem in HVAC. This is 100-year-old problem. And he was just blown away when I showed him the data on it. And after that, I was like, all right, that's it. Redesigning Blue Box, going to shrink it down to a nice portable system. And that's it. We'll look at nothing else except coils moving forward, right? And because there's 2 billion coils in the world today, right? So I was like, all right, that's a pretty good TAM, or total addressable market, and every single one is is running fouled and inhibited, and I could do the math on what the efficiency gains are, and that's it. We're going. That was the start.
Well, and the thing I love most, I mean, as you said, it's kind of an accidental innovation, just kind of fell into it. But you didn't stop there. You've also continued to be
Yeah,
innovating.
well, what's interesting about, I always say it's an accidental innovation, but it's funny, I look back on it and I was like, I was probably like the perfect guy to solve this problem, for several reasons. One, it it this is where not being a trained engineer probably helped a little bit, because even though I was full aware of the safety protocol of lockout tagout, right? But it's just the way I think, I looked at him like, this is a protocol that was developed for like refineries and power plants and other,
Yeah.
that's always been applied to all other systems. And you have this fundamental problem, and it's not like it's not unsafe, right? Like, it is safe to be in an air handler on the upside. You just don't be on the air handler when it's where the mechanical equipment is, but you have a division, right? So I just started taking a kind of a first principles approach to thinking about the problem and how to solve it. And just because this was the general rule of thumb of like, you never work on systems live, doesn't mean you can't, right?
Mm.
Everything is safe. Everything that we do is insanely safe, right? Um, and
More
it,
safe actually than some of the things that do use lockout tagout, because if you do lockout tagout incorrectly, you could put
oh,
yourself in danger. It's
oh yeah,
happened many
oh
times.
yeah. Let me tell you, there's people that have been, lockout time. Like, it's like, I mean, because then you go on the side of where all the equipment is, and there's been instances where people turn on the equipment, right? Like
Yeah.
remotely and whatever, and et cetera, like, or because they didn't do lockout tagout correctly. And I mean, there's a whole,
It's a whole separate
so the
issue.
way to approach it is just never enter the hot side of the equipment ever, right? We keep a country mile away from that,
Yeah.
so we always
Healthy
stay,
respect.
yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. And so, but by
You were talking
solving
about first principles.
the what,
You
yeah,
were,
so the idea here is to take a first principles approach. And it's interesting because by solving this fundamental problem, right? And I knew nothing about HVAC. So when I first developed it, it was one of these where I was like, all right, I know I solved the fundamental problem, but I really don't know or understand HVAC, right? And I go, I need to kind of do the long march. I need to get dirty a little bit. And, I built a service team, and we started, going to clients. I mean, my first major client was the Bellagio in Las Vegas. And I mean, we transformed the efficiency of the Bellagio literally overnight, with this. And then that got us, we've done half the strip, right? Like MGM Grand, Mandalay Bay, the Mirage, Luxor, the Stratosphere. And, fast forward, we've now serviced over 40,000 coils, 2,000 buildings, everything from automotive plants to commercial real estate buildings to hotels, hospitals, data centers, food processing plants, etc. What was interesting is as I went from not knowing anything about HVAC, I really quickly became, now I really understood these systems well. I've seen every type that is going on. And one of the things I started noticing is how similar everything was. And these are big industrial equipment, big industrial systems, and it's kind of crazy the amount of energy they consume, and all these, there's a lot of factors to big commercial HVAC systems you look at. And one of the things I realized was, because the industry, first off, it's a technology that has barely changed in the last 80 years, right? So the HVAC system was developed by the Americans in the 1920s, in an age when energy consumption, carbon emissions, and human health really are kind of zero concern, right?
Yeah.
And the Americans back then, what do they love to do? They love to build big, giant, and centralized systems, right? Um, And because they never solved the coil problem back then, what they did was engineered the entire system around the problem. So what I mean by that is that if you look at HVAC systems, they're very big, right? They're big, they're bulky. Even your home system is relatively big and bulky and stuff like that. And that is all because the coils can be anywhere from a couple inches to 12 inches, but they're always within this range, right? You never see coils that are like 36 inches deep or, things like that. And that's all because a lack of coil cleanability. And I realized, I go, if they engineered the system, because they never solved the problem, like this means that you can actually take a first principles approach to redesigning these systems. And this has led to what we call what I call Kyvos. So Kyvos, and we just launched our website on that, is kyvos.com, and
which I will have in the show notes,
yeah,
because it's a Greek word.
It's Greek for cube, right? And I'm Greek, and I seem to design everything in forms of boxes and cubes, and so I thought it was quite appropriate. But Kyvos is a modular. What I've done is taken a modular design to HVAC, right? And by that, what I mean is, if you go to the Kyvos website, you'll see this cube, right? Is the first image that you'll see on it, and that's your coil, right? Now that cube is 8 inch. The coil itself is 8 inches by 8 inches by 8 inches, 8 inches deep, 8 inches wide, 8 inches to the side. The outer diameter is about 12 by 12 by 12, and
very manageable size.
Yeah, very manageable. It was designed that way, right? So one person can lift it. It weighs about 25 pounds. And that cube can be used as the evaporative, meaning the cold side, or the condenser, meaning to reject heat, right? But all we ever are going to make is one cube design. And so, like, for example, let's take your house. Let's take a house where, if any given house, you'll have the system that's outside, the big round, system, that's a condenser coil, and that rejects heat, right? And then inside in your attic, you'll have the evaporative coils, and that's going to be a big steel box, and it has a blower on it, and that's moving hydrofluorocarbons through the coil, and it goes to a compressor, and then those hydrofluorocarbons has to go to the condenser, rejects this heat, and you have what's called the refrigeration cycle, right? So the coil inside the house is different than the coil that's outside the house, and you have the compressor. And when you go to design, like you want to outfit your house with a HVAC system, you got to figure out how much tonnage you need to cool, and then they're going to size you up in, whether you got 6 tons or 7 tons or whatever, depending on your house size, right? And if you look at the HVAC industry, it's remarkable, because like you look at a Daikin, right, or Rheem, or any of the the manufacturers, you have a 1 ton system, 2 ton, 3 ton, 4 ton, 5 ton, 10 ton, 20 ton, 100 ton. You get into big commercial systems. And now the HVAC industry is broken into 2 separate main categories. One is your chilled water systems that are in all big buildings. These are the big, giant centralized systems, with big air handlers, and they use water. The system refrigerates water to make it cold, and then you circulate that water through these buildings, right? And then you have the packaged AC systems, which are based on hydrofluorocarbons. They're small. This is what you'll see in your house, on, say, in Starbucks or on McDonald's, or rooftops and stuff. And you're moving hydrofluorocarbons throughout the system, and it's a closed loop of hydrofluorocarbons. And that's 85% of the global market is hydrofluorocarbon based systems. Okay.
And people
Which,
have probably heard about hydrofluorocarbons
well,
because this is
yeah.
something that we've been talking about for a while, especially when we were talking about like the hole in the ozone layer and climate change. Like it's the big bad guy.
When the HVAC system was first designed, they were using chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs, and chlorofluorocarbons were putting a hole in the ozone layer, right? Insanely destructive, right, to the environment. So then about 50 years ago, the governments and everybody, they forced the industry to change from chlorofluorocarbons to hydrofluorocarbons. Now, hydrofluorocarbons do not punch a hole in the ozone layer, but hydrofluorocarbons are potent greenhouse gases. They retain heat 4,000 times greater than CO2, right? And the global HVAC industry uses a boatload of hydrofluorocarbons. All right, it's a gargantuan volume because, like, let's say for example, a house can use 20-25 pounds of hydrofluorocarbons. It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Kyvos, what is cool about Kyvos is the way I design it, it minimizes the use of hydrofluorocarbons by 95% and greater,
That's a
right?
huge reduction.
Absolutely. And how I saw that is we use water as our circulating refrigerant. So again, Kyvos is based on, it's Greek for cube, right? We're taking a modular design. So the cube, the coils are modular based, but we also made it where the compressor, we call it the power cube. What I did was I take just a 1-ton compressor and added 2 water based heat exchangers. So your hydrofluorocarbons goes into a very small loop between the compressor and the heat exchangers, and then you circulate water through the heat exchangers, and so the water will absorb the heat, and then it makes the basically, because it'll make hot water and cold water, right?
Right.
And I mean, you can make really cold water, like 0 degrees. You put glycol in the water and you can make it, as cold as you want. And
And glycol is antifreeze.
yeah, it's antifreeze. And if you need to make it really, and there's advantages to that, but it'll make hot water and cold water, right? But the system, what you do then, instead of like circulating hydrofluorocarbons throughout your house, right? Which means you have to now lay copper lines and you gotta, weld the lines and what's called brazing and stuff. All you do now is run PEX lines, which is, used in plumbing, and you just circulate chilled water throughout the house and it goes through the cube. But the cubes are so deep, 8 inches is a really deep cube, right? It absorbs all this energy. Like the performance is off the charts, right?
So is this something like the average homeowner could have in their home
Yeah.
in the future?
So Kyvos is designed for, it is actually designed to be a universal system that can be applied to your house, to, like I said, Starbucks, a shopping center. You can even apply the same system to high-rise buildings. Like I always like to tell everybody, Kyvos can go into your home or Rockefeller Center in New York City, right? And it pioneers it's a universal, it's a singular platform system. But the big push is to make everything water-based. Now, how we make water, so water has the advantage. This is why all big buildings use water, is because water absorbs heat 30 times greater than, say, hydrofluorocarbons, right? And it's also very low your cost, right? It's
Right.
water. But it's because it absorbs so much heat, it's hard to reject that heat, right?
How do you get it back out?
Yeah, how to, because it'll make cold, but then you have a lot of hot water. Well, think about your home now, right? You have a system and it makes, the power cubes make hot water and cold water. Before, in your HVAC system, it was hydrofluorocarbons that was hot and you had to reject it outside and you're just throwing away the heat, right? Well, now everything is hot water. So what I did was design what we call thermal storage cubes, and you circulate the hot water through the thermal storage cubes. And now you have all the hot water you need for your showers. If you have swimming pools, you want to heat your swimming pool or hot tub or any hot water need, you can now store that heat and then use it whenever you want, right? It's
That's
literally
awesome.
free energy, right? Like, and give you an
Because it's
idea.
already there.
It's already there, right? It's like, but because now it's in water, it's easy now to transfer that heat, and it just makes it easy to store that heat, instead of having a hot water heater, which can consume 30 to 50,000 BTUs a day to, give you your hot water. You can now have all the hot water you need, and that it was all energy that was being thrown away, right?
Wow.
And it makes it easy because it's all water-based. But take the same concept on the cold, and you circulate the chilled water through the cubes, and you do it really cold, like say 0 degrees. And then what you do is make ice, right? So imagine a system that, you're down in Houston, right? Gets a little warm down there, especially
Ooh,
during.
buddy. Does it ever?
Yeah. So let's say it's going to be exceptional, so what you could do is run your system at nighttime, and you charge the system. So you're making ice and you're making hot water. So you wake up in the morning, you got your hot water for your showers and stuff, and you're making ice. And then during the day, you can run off the ice, and you're off grid. You're taking the stress off the grid. Right.
Man.
Now, this essence, think about the Tesla Powerwall, right? The Tesla Powerwall uses lithium ion as the battery, as the lithium ion batteries to store electrons. And one Tesla Powerwall stores 13.5 kilowatts of electricity. And it costs about, and this is rough rule of thumb, but like $10,000 per Powerwall, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a 3,000 square foot house, you may need 2, 3, maybe even 4 Tesla Powerwalls, right? 10,000 a pop, it starts adding up.
Sure.
70% of all the energy in your house is going to your HVAC system. So now you have Kyvos, right? And now you can store the energy from Kyvos in water, right? And water is cheap, right? Storing it in there, so one Kyvos thermal storage cube, when you make ice, is the equivalent of storing 25 kilowatts, almost twice of a Tesla Powerwall of stored energy. And it'll cost 95% less.
And that's so crazy to think about because, most of us have our fridges make ice. We don't even think about it. We just go up there, we just get the ice out of our freezer.
Yeah.
And it's always there. So we don't think about what it took to create that.
Exactly. And so now you have a system that is so simple and low cost to store all the thermal energy, right? Which, I mean, like, let's say you want to put solar on your house. You could run your system, have all the cooling you need during the day, and have excess energy, and you store it as ice, and then you run off the ice off grid. Or you can run it, so what it does, it transforms battery storage, right? It said storing energy. Thermal energy is the biggest, this is the most energy most buildings are going to use, right? So water is the best form of thermal storage that there is. And once you make the system water-based, it just changes everything about heating and cooling. And what is also cool is what is neat about this, about Kyvos, is that all you do is reverse flow, and now you have all the heating you need. Like you can now heat your entire house just with, the hot and because because you're circulating water, and you have glycol in the water. As long as there's circulation, Kyvos can give you heat. Like in heat pumps, if it gets really cold outside, they start losing their effectiveness because they can't no longer circulate the refrigerant. With Kyvos, because you're circulating water through it, you solve that problem. It could be -50 outside. I give you all the heat you need. It changes heating fundamentally.
I mean, Jim, this has been such a fascinating and eye-opening conversation. I mean, I just love the way that you thought about this and kind of, looked at it from a different way instead of exactly as you said, like if you had been an engineer and been taught a certain way to look at things, you might not have been able to see it the other way. And I think it's such a beautiful reminder to everyone of being able to literally think outside the Kyvos in this case, right?
Yeah. Outside the cube,
Well, how can people get in contact with you? Like if they are, commercial real estate investors or developers, they've got these big places or facility managers, and they want to use Blue Box to improve their air coils, or if they want to install Kyvos, how's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, we have the Blue Box website, so anybody that goes to the website and they want to get in contact, just go through the website, and we have a team watching that thing constantly, and we'll get back to you ASAP, trust me. So on Kyvos, the Kyvos site is up. We are now we're just setting up supply chain and everything. So we're going to start installing systems in Dallas first, starting probably next month. And we'll start doing some field tests because the system is already fully developed, right? We have it here in our R&D, fully operating. We've hammered out all the components. And it's the cool thing about Kyvos too, I didn't really explain, is, the cube, the reason it's so deep is because it's self-cleaning. I've automated the Blue Box into the system. So what the system does, it injects enzymes into the coils. That's why the cubes can be so deep, right? Because if you put an 8-inch cube into, like coil into a home, like you're replacing that every, once a year, because it'll plug up so fast. So the system is self-cleaning, which means it's going to be the healthiest system you'll ever have. Also, HVAC systems, you got to replace them every 10 to 15 years, and it's all because of coil fouling. Kyvos, we're designing it'll last you a minimum 50 years. I would not be surprised if it lasts 100 years.
Wow.
Because it's self-cleaning. And this is the thing that's really interesting about this is, and the ability, by making it water, right? And there's also the big fundamental innovation with Kyvos, what makes it all work. And I'll explain to you, like, big buildings use water, right? Big centralized systems, and they have cooling towers that reject heat, right? And the way they reject heat is through evaporation and stuff. But you can't do that with smaller. You can't have a cooling tower on your home, right? It's
Yeah, I
operation.
mean, cooling towers take up such a huge footprint.
They take up a huge footprint, but like even with the home, you can have a small, tiny cooling tower, but like it's a source of Legionella, right?
Yeah.
You got to do chemical treatment in it. It's not practical. So Kyvos is a closed loop system. So the key is, like, how do you reject heat in a system? In a way to do it. This gets into what I call the cooling tunnel. And the cooling tunnel, this is kind of an important, point to explain, because this is what makes Kyvos possible. So, because let's say you have a house, you got a 3,000 square foot house, and depending where you're at, let's just say rough numbers, you need 6 tons of cooling. The reason you need 6 tons of cooling is it's sized for the hottest day of the year. And when it's really hot outside, your system has a hard time rejecting heat, right? Which means that you're going to lose half your efficiency. And a way to think about this is, for every ton of cooling, that's 12,000 BTUs. So you got 6 tons, that's 72,000 BTUs. Not to do too much math here, but the BTUs is your cooling load, right? If it's 105 degrees outside, you cannot reject heat below 105 degrees, which means that you cannot get 72,000 BTUs. What you'll get is maybe 30,000 BTUs, right? You'll get half the volume. And this is really a little technical. I'm not going to dive too much into that, but like, it's the inability to reject heat. You lose half your efficiency. What the cooling tunnel does is instead of having your condenser outside where it's ugly under the house and exposed to all the elements, we would put the cooling tunnel in your attic, and you have a piece of duct, like air duct, that goes from one side of the house to the other side of the attic. And you have a blower that brings in the air from the outside, and you have a Kyvos cube in the middle. And what we will do is bring in the outside air, right? Now, the Kyvos cubes inside, the evaporative side, what we do is, because they're so deep, right, and they're so cold, they are making a tremendous volume of condensate, a lot of moisture. It squeezes the moisture out of the air. And on the, for a 3,000 square foot home, the system probably will make anywhere from 30 to maybe 50 gallons of water a day, right? It's a lot of water.
A lot of water. Now,
all HVAC systems produce, especially down in Houston, produce a tremendous volume of condensate, right? Even with the existing design. When you have a really deep cube, it's even going to be more because there's so much more surface area. And that condensate has always been sent down the drain.
Mm-hmm.
Reason why is because the coils get so nasty, no one wants to touch it.
Right. Right.
But Kyvos is self-cleaning. We solve coil cleanability. So our condensate comes off that coil and it's pristine. And it's no longer any biology in it or anything like that. So what the system does, it harvests that condensate, and then it comes off cold, and it's pure distilled water. And then we send it to the cooling tunnel. And at the very entrance of the cooling tunnel, we have a nozzle, and it sprays that condensate into the entrance of the nozzle as a fine, fine mist.
Wow.
So hot air comes in.
So it's reducing.
And then and what it does through evaporation, because you get phase change, it cools down the air. So in Dallas last summer, we're running the cooling tunnel. It was 108 degrees last summer, right? It was 108. It was painful. And this is actually only a section that's 6 feet, all right, of duct. And it's and we're moving 1,500 CFM of air, which that's a lot of airflow. So 108 coming in, we hit with the nozzles. By the time it got to the condensing cube, to the coil, that air temperature was 75 degrees.
That's like what I keep my house at anyway.
It's crazy. It was crazy, the drop, right? Now, this was helped because it's very dry out. So it really, because when it evaporates out. So like if you're in a way more humid environment, it may be not as low as 75, but it'll still be,
it's still a dramatic difference.
Dramatic low, right? And so the air is hitting it at 75 degrees, rejecting heat all day long. And so we get our 12,000 BTUs per ton, right? What this means is, imagine right now, you have to have 6 tons in your house. With Kyvos, because of the cooling tunnel, we can now size your house with 3 tons. And when you put in the thermal storage cubes, because there's the efficiency gains, then now you can drop it down to 2 tons.
Mm.
And we actually think you can even get down to even 1 ton, like there's a few other tricks
as you go down. Well, and I think for the average homeowner, I mean, I know people, like, as you said, the summer we were in triple digits for months. I think we had like 40 days over 100 degrees.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. And people, they're complaining, their inflation, people don't have as much spendable cash, and yet they have to be comfortable in their home, right? That's something that's non-negotiable for people. So to be able to reduce those costs and to make sure that the house is cooler, because most HVAC systems can only guarantee a 25-degree drop from the outside temperature to the inside temperature. And it sounds like you solve for that.
So here's, what's interesting is when it's water-based, right? In our testing, we were preheating the air. We're putting heaters on the air, and we're moving air through the coil at like 1,500 CFM, and we're putting the air in at 115 degrees, right? Just to go to the extreme. our exit temperature, 44 degrees,
Oh my gosh.
71-degree drop. And that's because the coils are so deep and we have chilled water, and we can, now we're running all the power cubes and, making sure we got plenty of cooling load, but this is what water does. It makes this thing a hot rod, right?
Yeah.
Like, I could probably design your system to be, so I could make it snow in your house if you wanted to, right? Like, you have all the load. But this gets into, but this is the effect you get because the coils are always going to be clean, right? So they always have perfect heat transfer. They're really deep, right? So you're going to remove all that moisture, because if you remove all that moisture out of the air, you can, you can have your house be at 78 degrees and make it feel like it's 70 degrees, right?
Yeah.
You get another huge improvement just by dehumidification. So the system, is, really dehumidifies. All these things happen when you have a deep coil, but you can only have a deep coil if you solve coil cleanability. And then you can only make the whole system work if you solve the cooling tunnel, which, we also got, now is patent pending, but, I know I'm going to get those patents anyhow, but it's an interesting design. And I'm not breaking any laws of thermodynamics, right?
It sounds like you're leveraging the laws of thermodynamics.
I'm leveraging it. I'm taking the Archimedes approach to everything, right? Like, I'm literally, by leveraging all these components and redesigning the system in a fundamental way. And all of a sudden now you have the healthiest, most efficient, most powerful HVAC system, and it's going to be the lowest cost system, because hydrofluorocarbons is one of the most expensive components of your HVAC system. Without hydrofluorocarbons, you don't need copper. We minimize the use of copper by 95%. That's the second most expensive component of your HVAC system.
I hope you have like winning a Nobel Prize like on your vision board or something, because Jim, the improvement to the world is just so great, and it is just an absolute honor.
It's exciting, and this is not like, what's so cool about this is, I think it's easy. We've gone and kind of done a deep dive in HVAC technology, which, a lot of people are not mechanical, but like solving the problem with coils, right? When I explain this to people get it, right? It's relatable,
right?
Especially in an age when it's like you have like, how does Chat GPT work, right? Like, no one has a clue. Like, it's just almost magic. And all these, like, everybody's used to a world where everything is about like really expensive, high-tech solutions, that, seem to be the only way to do anything, right? This is the opposite, right? This is all about simplicity, and with simplicity comes scalability, right? This is my objective on this is how to design a system that can scale to, whether it's your home, whether it's McDonald's, whether it's Rockefeller Center, data centers, et cetera, and drive down the costs, of owning, minimize the carbon footprint, like all these things. And this is what enables it to scale. And yeah, it's cool.
It's really, really cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for, following that itch that you just had to scratch about this and figuring this out for all of us. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the interest on this, and it's been a pleasure to meet you and to do this. So thank you.
Absolutely. And to the listeners, I hope you guys had notepads out and were taking notes, because there is so much that was jam-packed into here. Please reach out to Jim and to Blue Box and to Kyvos and all of the things, so that you can be living, more efficiently, healthier, all the things that we all wish for. So until next time, everyone, take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Don't leave it. Don't leave it.
Oh, no, I'm not going to leave.
Okay.